Okay, so Elise Keddie from the California Air Resources Board. She is just a leader in this space, and is right on the front lines of building the electric transportation future. So in her role as the Zero Emission Vehicle Implementation Section Manager, she's been a key partner in organizing this event and in moving the market. Her group is responsible for coordinating compliance with our electric vehicle regulations in California, developing and implementing policies that promote and support zero-emission vehicle awareness, education, and consumer adoption. So Elise, would you please join us and lend us your expertise?
Thank you. Okay. Thanks, Matt. I'll admit, when I saw Matt this morning, I said, oh, don't go through my bio, just, go off script. But I didn't expect you to be so flattering in going off script. That's really nice. And in response to the question about, are there maps, are there resources for looking at charging stations, most of the infrastructure providers, meaning commercial companies, do have those. They're available on websites, on their websites, as well as on apps. I would say my agency, CARB, strongly supports the use of NREL, which is a national laboratory, their alternative fuels data center app. And in fact, that's something that we're pointing to as a requirement in a regulatory effort that CARB has just initiated. But there are lots of resources. Also, many drivers use PlugShare, which is a crowdsourced app. So there are lots of ways to find them. I've also heard that Google is planning on getting into this space. So there are times on Google Maps where you can find charging stations as well. So I'm happy to be here today, and I'm happy to be able to spend a few minutes talking about my agency, the California Air Resources Board, or CARB's activities regarding zero-emission vehicles. A couple of introductory pieces, the fact that we are the state regulatory air quality agency, and we're considering pollutant criteria pollutants, meaning ozone, NOx, particulate matter, as well as considerations for climate change, GHG emission reductions. And we know that even with the remarkable achievements that CARB has had over the past 50 plus years, there are still over 12 million Californians that breathe unhealthy air, and there are still large portions of our state that do not meet our federal air quality attainment. And then, Kevin described this some as well, but the fact that there is a huge interface between air quality, climate change, and transportation. I'm very glad I didn't use the slide that calls out we have similar slides, not identical slides, but in terms of, what the transportation sector is responsible for. In fact, I think the CARB slide actually uses direct and indirect GHG. So our number is larger than what you presented, but yours is absolutely correct. The big thing is, and speaking just conventionally of cars and trucks, you see the information here regarding harmful particulates, meaning particulate matter, ozone formation, and greenhouse gas emissions. And I think most people know this is a typical picture of downtown LA. And in fact, this was taken, I think this picture may have come from 2014. So it's not the horrible, nasty photos that those of us who've been around for a while remember from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. This actually was just a few years ago. And there's no reason to dwell on this extensively. Zero-emission vehicles are a way for us to meet those air quality challenges. They have zero tailpipe emissions. We know that they're energy efficient. In terms of the fuel synergy is really important, but we also recognize that with the achievements we've made in vehicle adoption, primarily in the passenger car segment, there are still challenges to be faced. Cost parity with conventional vehicles, and that's especially critical for heavy-duty sector. Consumer awareness, I'm going to touch on that a tiny bit, and It's already been mentioned, charging infrastructure. All of those things we know are barriers. And in some case, it may be a perceived barrier greater than it is an actual barrier. The consumer awareness aspect can definitely help break that down. And Kevin touched on this as well. You know, we do have in California greater volumes, terrific sales, as well as increased market share. In fact, I believe that in California last year, zero-emission vehicles, meaning battery, fuel cell, and plug-in electrics, represented about 9% of California sales in the passenger car segment, which is pretty remarkable. We lead the rest of the country, but, you know, and as Kevin mentioned, we're well over, we're like 580,000 ZEVs, meaning passenger car, light duty truck, in California, but we need to hit that 1.5 million and goal in 2025, let alone the 5 million in 2030. So in considering what other things are needed to grow this market, in terms of support policies, we've got the education awareness. I'm going to close with that very briefly. Financial, I'll touch upon in terms of consumer incentives, and those are incentives both for consumers as well as fleet applications, and those are available in both the light and heavy duty sector. And then planning and partnerships in terms of our coordination, and certainly, you know, my agency in coordination with the Energy Commission, with our colleagues at DGS, with our colleagues at GoBiz, are all working together to achieve the state's goals. So in terms of our consumer incentive programs, there is a federal tax credit there are a couple of automakers that have already exceeded the threshold to start ramping down on that monetary gain, meaning instead of vehicles receiving a $7,500 rebate, it's now half that amount, and ultimately it will transition. But there has been federal legislation introduced, both completely eliminating it as well as continuing it and changing the parameters associated with it. I'm far more familiar with our state rebate, which provides consumer rebate for, and this is a cash check in the mail after purchase, and this is available for consumers as well as fleets. Through the history of this program, the modern era, over $670 million have been deployed for consumer rebates, reflecting over 300,000 cars. And in terms of how that applies to the low and moderate income sector, there's been 47 million deployed for rebates assisting those consumers, reflecting over 11,000. And that funding has been state funding and contributions from CEC's pots of funds, as well as CARB's funds, along with cap and trade funding. The other programs listed on this slide, Clean Vehicle Assistance Program is a financing assistance program for low to moderate income consumers to help finance a vehicle. Clean Cars for All is a replacement program for consumers where they're actually replacing their older polluting vehicle that's identified through regional smog checks, and funds are available for them to get a much cleaner technology vehicle. And then in addition to what we have for the statewide grants, there are regional air districts that have additional funds for rebates. And this Clean Fuel Reward program, that's sort of a stay tuned activity. That's a program that's being developed through funding available through utilities as a result of CARB's low carbon fuel standard regulation. So our utilities will have funds to be able to apply in a point of purchase rebate at dealerships. And with heavy duty investments, there are 3 areas identified here: demonstration projects, pilot projects, and commercialization activities. Basically, CARB has funds available and has deployed a number of demonstration projects, demonstrating technology, that early stage work, pilot projects, applications of those demos in real world settings, and also in terms of really getting that usage stuff. And commercialization, just as we have the consumer rebates for light-duty vehicles, we also have that for heavy-duty vehicles through our HVIP program, which is a hybrid voucher incentive program that provides actually vouchers to be applied toward the purchase of heavy-duty technology. To date, over 3,900 vehicles have received incentives as a result, and that's with an expenditure of about $118 million, and that also represents participation by over 1,300 fleets being able to use those funds. And then also, of course, there's a line about the Volkswagen Beneficiary Trust. Those are the NOx mitigation funds through the Volkswagen Consent Decree, through Appendix D as in dog. There are programs that you'll be seeing information about implemented in the coming 6 to 12 months, specific funding available for zero-emission projects in the heavy-duty sector. And we are an air quality regulatory agency. You can refer, I've just talked about a lot of carrots, meaning incentives. I've got to cover a few sticks. And another, I have one friend who always refers to this, we call it sticks and carrots. I have one friend who calls it spinach and ice cream, and which is good except for someone who actually likes spinach too. It's kind of, but if you have to choose between the two. So we do have some regulatory activities coming forward. Our innovative clean transit regulation has already been through its 2 board hearings and is about to file its final rulemaking paperwork. That sets forth, a transition to zero emission by 2040 for transit agencies. Our zero emission airport shuttle rule had its first hearing in February and will be returning to the board for its final approval in June. Same thing with the zero-emission powertrain certification. That one's important because that actually sets certification requirements for these technologies to meet, which includes warranty considerations. So that way, for you as fleet operators, you know that your vehicle has actually met certification and has been reviewed and know it's a sound technology. And then the Advanced Clean Trucks rulemaking is still in its informal rulemaking process. It's anticipated to come to the board by the end of this year, and that actually is patterned after our light-duty ZEV requirement, which actually it would be focused on truck manufacturers, that a portion of their vehicles that they deliver for sale be zero emission. And my closing slide has to do with ZEV education and outreach. We know, I've already mentioned, really, for people to become aware, familiar with the technologies, familiar with charging infrastructure, it's something that CARB participated in more actively, say like 15 plus years ago in the earlier stages of our ZEV reg. But this slide here calls out the Electric for All website, which is run by Veloz. Veloz is a nonprofit that has multiple state agency participants in it, as well as automakers, charging infrastructure providers, and a variety of entities that really want to move the market, transitioning to zero-emission vehicles. Their focus is on battery electric cars, but they have sponsored a media campaign on opposites, electric for dog lovers, electric for cat lovers. And they also have some short videos that you can find on their website, as well as, depending on what type of Google searches you use, they may just pop up unexpectedly. On those opposite campaigns, punk rocker and symphony goer. And they've actually received a fair amount of interest, and in the coming months they're actually going to deploy some new video components regarding electric vehicle options.